Shi'ud Hashem Menachem is true. Amen. First Shi'ud Torah, we have a yard site today, is Chana Gittel Bat Mordechai. Yeah? Ilun Shema for her. And we need Yeshuot in Israel and also here and everywhere in the world. Question for today, daat. This is the halakha class, and the question for today is something that I find myself constantly debating with people about when I go over people's houses. Tavshil sonen, and I might need some help with some of the Hebrew words, okay? Tavshil sonen, shaya munach b'mikrar, yeah? Mikarer, a fridge, yeah? Me'erev Shabbat, האם מותר לחממו על הפלטה של שבת, או יש בזה איסור משום שנראה כמבשל בשבת. And in English it means wet dishes, wet food, meat that has gravy or juice, chicken that has juice, mahshi that's inside of a lot of juice, yabda that's in a lot of juice. We can go on and on. Wet foods. We know we don't put soup on the fire on Shabbat. You can't warm up soup on Shabbat because it's liquid. But you're allowed to warm up dry foods on Shabbat. But what if the dry food has a lot of moisture in it? And so I've been at people's houses where they tell me, no, the mahshi has way too much liquid, you can't put it in. Are they right? Teshuvah, answer. B'Masechet Shabbat Shaninu, we learned in Masechet Shabbat, Kol sheba b'hamim lefnei Shabbat, shulin oto b'hamim b'Shabbat, v'chol shelo ba b'hamim b'Shabbat, Shabbat, madichin oto b'hamim b'Shabbat. And he's going to explain what this means. Kilomar, as if to say, the bash in the pashil kol solchom mifnei Shabbat, mutar l'sharoto b'hamim shel keli rishon, kedei lechamim Shabbat, she'en bishul ahad bishul. Something that's already cooked before Shabbat, you're allowed to warm it up on top of, not directly on top of the fire, on top of a pot that's on top of the fire, on top of a blech, on top of a plata that's on top of the fire. About something that's not cooked before Shabbat. You can't cook, you can't warm up on a blech something that's raw, it has to already be cooked. ופישו בגמרא, the Gemara says, דבר שבא בחמים בשבת, כגון עוף שנפשל כל סולחו מערב שבת. Chicken that was cooked before Shabbat, מותר לשרותו בחמים בשבת כדי לחממו. You can put it and warm it on Shabbat. והוא הדין שמותר לעמידו כנגד האש כדי שתחמם, or you can put it next to the fire. If you don't have, let's say, a plate, you want to put it next to the fire, not on the fire, to warm it up, that's also okay. וכן פסק מרן שולחן ערוך, שדבר שנפשל כל סולחו, מותר להניחו כנגד מדורה, you're allowed to put something that was cooked before Shabbat that's dry next to a fire or on a blech, let's call it, even if it will get to a high temperature of yad soledet, but it's a cooking temperature, it's okay. So the question, Yossi, the question is, we know that you're allowed to warm up hot food, dry food on Shabbat. You don't warm up soup on Shabbat. What if it's like a mahshi or chicken and a lot of juice? How much juice is acceptable to warm up on Shabbat? והנה, דעת רש"י והראש ורבנו יונה המובא בהר"ן, שדווקא תבשיל יבש כגון חתיכות בשר או חתיכות דגים וכיוצא בהן, אין בו משום בישול בשבת. Rashi and the Rosh and Rabbeinu Yonah hold it's talking about only dry foods. When it says dry foods can be reheated, it means really dry foods, like slices of steak, slices of meat, or a piece of fish. It's already cooked. About tabshil lach, but a wet food, kigon marak, shenistanen, like soup that got cold. Yeshua mishum bishul habishul. You cannot put a soup back on the fire. You cannot warm it up if it'll get to the high temperature. Now, there's a very famous Rambam here. The Rambam is very, very famous because the Temanim, who love the Rambam, Temanim follow this Rambam. Abah Rambam v'harashba v'haran holds, Sovrim, she'af belach shenistanen en bishul ahad bishul. Rambam holds, Maimonides holds, you're allowed to reheat wet on Shabbat. Yeah. I was at a friend of mine, Yemenite guy, Yemenite family. They don't live here anymore. They live in Israel now. And he said, I said, do you actually heat up soup on Shabbat? He said, absolutely. Rambam says it's allowed. Soup. Rambam says it's allowed, and Temanim, Rambam is like the guy. It's a mahloket Rashi ve'Rambam, and it's a biblical mahloket. We have to be strict. And so therefore, when it comes to wet food, sorry, we don't hold like this in Rambam because it's too risky. And look at Maran Shulchan Aruch, what does he write? If you have a cooked food that got cold, when it comes to a soup, you cannot reheat it. About tafshil yabesh, says Maran Shulchan Aruch, if it's dry, mutad, you can warm it back up. Look at the Bet Yosef, and he explains. Ready for this Bet Yosef? What's called a wet food that I'm not allowed to reheat? If most of the dish, majority is liquid, says the Bet Yosef. About tavshil shel basar or dagim, but a cooked food, a cooked dish of fish or meat, and there's fat or oils or wet or moisture in it. If the majority of this dish is dry foods, it's not forbidden to reheat it. So Maran Bet Yosef says, so according to this, 50%, 51% of my dish is the meat of the mahshi, is the chicken. 49% is juice. That's rov, it's majority dry. So I would be able to heat it up on Shabbat. Abraham Pimentel, he agrees. And it makes sense. Why? You cannot find a meat dish she'en bo mem vav he lamed. He lamed. Mohel, not mohel. Mem vav he lamed. Veshuman. It means moisture. What kind of word is this? You're not going to find a meat dish that doesn't have moisture, that doesn't have fat. I don't know what that word means. Mem vav he lamed. Veshuman. That doesn't have fat or juice. You know that word? Mem vav he lamed. And even so, that every dish on Shabbat has some liquid. It's considered a dry food. וכן כתבו הפרי מגדים, והגאון רבי שלום מרדכי הכהן שבדרון בדעת תורה, לפיכך therefore תבשיל של בשר או דגים, a cooked dish of meat or fish, Moroccan fish sitting in juice, ותפוחי האדמה, potatoes, וכיוצא בזה, כל שרובו יבש, as long as the majority of this thing is dry food, מותר לחממו לשבת, you can reheat this on Shabbat. גם באופן שמגיע ליד סולדתו, even if it gets very, very hot. And you say, what? But the juice is getting really, really hot. Doesn't matter. The juice, you got it? What is it?
When you mix fluids.
Is it a word used by people? What does that mean? It's not a street word. About tafshil lah, kigon marak, but a real wet food, such as soup, that's 100% or 51% wet. Yeah, there's pieces of meat in the Yemenite soup, or there's chicken in the chicken soup, or matzah balls, which is dry, but the majority is wet. Since the majority of the soup is wet, you cannot warm it up on Shabbat. And so therefore we have ramifications. Yeah. Take the meat out of the soup and you want to put that meat on the block. Yeah, absolutely. Because once you take the meat out of the soup, whatever moisture is there is a miut. It's a minority. Good. That's it.
But hooked up to light. Will be off.
Yeah, that's an excellent question, and it's not going to be addressed today. It's probably okay. The timer is usually okay, but it's not in this house. It's a loophole. When you put the soup on, it's cold, and then the timer. It's a great question. I have a family member that makes coffee on a timer. The coffee machine's on a timer, and so when it clicks, the water gets hot, and can I drink the coffee? So the timer question is a whole nother situation. I'm not going to even try right now. Let's get to the basics first. Ulam. Now that we learned And even though you can warm up a dry food on Shabbat, מכל מקום, לא מותר להניחו על כלאיים של גז או פתילה של נפט, וכיוצא בזה כמו כדי לחמור. You cannot put it straight on the fire. So he's going to this whole blech halacha now. You can't put you can't reheat the mahshi straight on top of the stove. Shema yachateh b'gehanim, like the Gemara says, maybe you're going to stoke the coals and change the heat. That was the gezerah. That's why there's such a thing called the blech. You have to block the fire, so you can't manipulate the fire. כלומר, שמא ישכח ויגביה את הפתילה של האש כדי למהר את חימומו של התבשיל. The reason why you have to have a blech on Shabbat. We all know what a blech is, yeah? We use the word blech. Aluminum, a plata is like a plug into the wall. A metal sheet on top of the stove.
Oh, okay.
Do they use that? Do you guys use that?
No, I don't.
What do you use? We use that. Oh, yeah. No. I grew up with it's called a blech. Yeah. The fire's on. You go to Home Depot, you buy a huge square of tin of. They sell them. Yeah. Yeah. So. Oh, that I don't have. I just. No, not cast iron. Yeah, it's a blech. Helen, what do you have at home? A blech. You have a blech? What is it? It's a piece of tin or metal. It hangs down and covers the knobs. I personally don't use it. It's not for halakha reasons. I grew up on a blech. That's how I grew up. Yeah. I think the Ashkenazim generally use blechs. I'm pretty sure. Yeah. I'm pretty sure most like Lakewood, like Ashkenazim, they use blechs. They just slap a slab of metal on top of the stove. You put 2 burners on, and you're done. Okay, let's see. On low, because otherwise it'll burn. You can't put something straight on fire on Shabbat. So if you didn't know this, I think most people know this, but if you didn't know it, you can't leave a fire on Shabbat on the stove and say, I'm going to put the food right on the fire. You can't do that. You have to have a divider. Yeah, on Shabbat. You have to have a divider. And what do you use? A blech? You have a blech?
No, I do not.
What do you use? A hot plate?
I just have the hot water and I just.
Wow. Most people use blechs, no?
Yeah.
These are the words of Maran Shulchan Aruch. Mutar latet b'Shabbat al pi kedrat hamin tavshil shem pashel v'chos l'kayim b'Shabbat kegon fandish, what she says is betek afui hamimula basad mevushal. Fandish. Never hear this? It's betek afui hamimula basad mevushal. It's like stuffed empanadas, sambusa. Have you heard this word? Fandish? What's going on over here? It's okay to put a blech, a plata, a divider to do it. שמותר להניח בשבת תבשיל קר שנפשט חוסלקו על גבי מיחם שעלה לו אש, שכל דבר שמותר להניחו כנגד המדורה במקום שנמצא בו. Okay, let's skip ahead and get to the other part. The Magen Avraham writes, Magen Avraham mechalek bazeh. By the way, I skipped a chunk, so if you want to read it yourself, it's Yechave daat, book 2, siman 45. Magen Avraham mechalek bazeh ben tavshil lach roteach שאסור להניחו בשבת גם על גבי כדירה של חמין, משום שיש לגזור שמא יניחנו סונן, ויש בישול אחר בישול בלח, אבל תבשיל יבש אפילו סונן מותר להניחו בשבת על גבי כדירה, שאין בישול אחר בישול ביבש. Magen Avraham says that if it is a dry food and it's cold, it's fine. Like we know, this is the halakha we just said. Okay? Now, Rabbi Yishmael HaKohen writes in the Sefer Zera Emet, lehatid, to allow, lehamim b'Shabbat. He says it's allowed to warm up on Shabbat. Tabshil yabesh, a dry food, shenipashil kol zalfot, that's already cooked. Agabe pach matechet menukav, on a tin with holes. So if you have a tin with holes, so I guess the fire can come up. A blech with holes inside. Actually, someone literally asked me this question 2 weeks ago, a relative of mine. I never answered her yet. She wants to use like a grate as a blech with like gaps of space. I said, I don't know if that's allowed because you can technically still access the fire. But over here, he says the holes are small. If the holes are small, then he says, Rabbi Ishmael Kohen says, and in parentheses, he says, this device is called is best. Is the best. Is best. Aleph, Zayin, Bet, as best. What is that? Oh, yeah. Oh, as best. Okay. ונסתיים ממה שכתב המהר"ל שאם הונח דף על התנור מותר להניח עליו כדי שתבשיל החמימו. ואם כן, if this is true, where you can put the holes, הוא הדין שאם שם פח של מתכת מנוקה בנקבים קטנים על גבי הקירה, if you put a blech, let's say it has a lot of holes on top of the fire in Shabbat, שיש בה גחלים בוערות and underneath is a flame, הרי המחיצה של ברזל מפסקת בין הגחלים, then this would be a kosher divider and it would be allowed. Okay, וכן הדבר מחיים דניאל שלמה פינסו, ושכן המנהג להקל בירושלים. In Yerushalayim, people do this. They use this asbest. They use asbest. Okay. Now, the Sefer Ulfize, according to this, מותר להניח בשבת תבשיל יבש על פלטה חשמלית. According to this, you should be able to use an electric hot plate on Shabbat. הואיל והפח של הפלטה, the cover, the tin of the plata, of the plate, mafsik ben hoteh hashmal lekedirat hatavshil shehu yabesh. There's a dividing piece between the electric wires, right? The surface of the hot plate. So the question is, what's the blech on the hot plate? Yossi, you got the question over here? A hot plate is not on top of the stove. A hot plate is a new heat source. So shouldn't you have a divider on top of the hot plate? Or shouldn't you have to put aluminum foil on top of your hot plate? Where's the divider? Ah, good. So he says, number one, he says the first logic is the heating element is not on top. The heating element is below, and on top of that is the surface of the plate. That surface of the plate would serve as the blech, number one. And then he says, wait, okay, fine. Let me skip this part. According to this, גם כן יש לעתיד נטילת תבשיל יבש צונן על פלטה חשמלית, שמכיוון שהפח מפסיק בין חוטי החשמל בוערים ובין גדרה, הרי זה כמניח על גבי גדרה רקנית. So what we just said, the surface is dividing between the heating element below. ועוד, second reason, שבפלטה in a hot plate, אין כל אפשרות להגביה החום. You don't have the ability to change the temperature. The whole gezerah was maybe you'll stoke the coals, you'll stoke the flame. There is no flame. Another rabbi said this logic. His name was Rabbi Tzvi Pesach Frank, a very famous rabbi. Another reason that a hot plate should be allowed. Maybe the whole gezerah, maybe you'll stoke the flames, is only when you have what's it called? Like fluctuating heat source, like a fire that actually goes up and down. Shedarkan lid'och, to fade, right? Lid'och, to fade. Kim'ah, kim'ah. A fire goes up, goes down with coals, goes hotter, colder. You don't have a fire with coals or wood that stays the same temperature for 15 hours. In the original takana, they were afraid, you see, oh, my fire is going out, you're going to stoke it and add coals to it. Forget it the Shabbat. You'll make sure the fire gets higher. That was the whole reason for this whole blech gezerah in the first place. You're using an electric heat source, or using a gas stove, which is going to be the same flame for 30 hours, 40 hours if you want. It's not going to change the flame. It's going to stay the same temperature. Maybe the whole gezerah doesn't apply to a stove because the stove's never going to go out. There's no reason to touch the stove. Even if you technically could raise it, what do you mean? The button's right there on the hot plate. Why aren't you afraid I'm going to touch the button? Why would you touch the button? What's going wrong with your hot plate? It's staying the same temperature. וסברה זו נזכרה בדברי הגאון רבי יוסף גרשון Horowitz. He says the same thing. And a bunch of other Sefarim, the rabbi from Brisk, the Arugat Abosim, Bepetah HaDavid, they all agree. Last part. And the Sefer Tehillah David and the Sefer Pekudat Elazar ben Tovot, they say the same thing. Omnam, however, Harav HaGaon Rabbi Ovadia Hadaya, Syrian, Halabi rabbi. Rabbi Ovadia Hadaya says in the Sefer Yaskil Avdi, Katav le'esor le'aniach b'Shabbat tavshil ala plata ha'ashmanit hamimo. He says you cannot use a hot plate on Shabbat. Even though the surface is dividing from the electric heating element below, you need something additional to make you remember it's Shabbat on top of the heating source, says the Rabbi Hadaya. There's only one thing here. There's nothing on top of it. So you're not. He says that you need another surface on top of the flame. Who says this? Who's the name of Rabbi Hadaya? Rabbi Ovadia Hadaya is a Halabi rabbi. You will need another thing on top of the hot plate because you cannot go straight on the heat source. He's saying, this Rabbi Hadaya is talking. Ulam. However, Harav Atzmo, this same rabbi, Hadad Tavrel legezizeh. This is the phrase the Gemara uses. It literally means he broke his fist. He had a punch and he weakened his punch. He sort of gave in. In the second Sefer Yaskil Avdi, and he writes in the second Sefer, I originally said it's asur to use a plata, a hot plate. And now, ata bero'oti shirabim v'chen shilamim mishtamashim v'shabbat b'plata hashmalit. Everyone's using the plata hashmalit. I see everyone's using hot plates. V'en potzeh peh. No one's stopping them. Natati elibi le'avin al masam chulati. So now I need to understand. Maybe I made a mistake and it's allowed, and I want to understand why people use it. Ubati l'idei hakara. And now I realize shebazeh yesh la'akil, that you should be lenient and allow the hot plate. Mishum she'haplata hashmalit min lechatechila na'azi l'shem shimush b'shabbat. This is his logic. Yossi, ready for this logic? A hot plate is made and sold for Shabbat. It's a Shabbat device. You don't use it during the week. V'nekret, and they even call it plata shel Shabbat. It's the Shabbat hot plate. V'im ken, if this is true, harei yesh ba siman lechol adam she'ayom Shabbat. The hot plate itself is the reminder that it's Shabbat. This is his logic. Why do I need a blech to remind me it's Shabbat on top of the hot plate? It's called a Shabbat plate. I'll never forget. ולא יבוא להשתמש בה באיסור, כגון להחזיר עליה תבשיל שונה בשל כוסכו, או תבשיל חלום וכזה בזה. ומכיוון שאין האש נראית לעין, ואין כאן חשש חיטוי, in addition to the first logic, well, the flame, the heating element is covered, this is why you should be lenient here. Actually the opposite. Now I say the hot plate is better than a blech. Because number one, I know it's Shabbat because it's a hot plate. And number two, I can't even touch the fire. Maybe a blech, I can take the blech off and touch the flame. On a hot plate, you're never going to do that. You can't take the kisui off. It's stuck. There's no greater reminder. Today is Saturday, then when you walk in the kitchen and see a hot plate on the thing. This is the Rabbi Hadaya taking back his words. Even the Hazon Ish, that was strict, he'll agree to this and say it's okay. The final halakha says the Chamadia. You have a cold food that was cooked before Shabbat, like we all do on Friday. And it was in the refrigerator. You can reheat this food on Shabbat. On a hot plate. Even if it gets to a very, very high temperature, it's fine. You can even put it on an asbest, which is a pach matechet minukav. It's a sheet with holes in it. Which is on the stove. The only thing we need to make sure is most of the dish is dry. 51% of the dish has to be dry. If 49% of this dish is juice and gravy, it's fine. But if 51% of the dish is liquid, you cannot put it on the hot plate. if 51% is liquid. My question is, and I don't know the answer, honestly. I've had lots of debates about this as well. Cholent. I don't even want to get into the cholent thing, but when I had cholent in yeshiva, you go like this with a spoon, it's not liquid, it's clumpy. I don't know if cholent is 51% liquid. No one that I know reheats cholent on Shabbat. Do you know anyone that will reheat cholent on Shabbat? Reheat cholent on Shabbat. If I had cholent Friday night, can I put it back Shabbat? No one I know will do it. I don't think it's 51%. You're looking at one. You don't ever here's the rule with cholent, okay? Until the kishka is gone, that cholent stays. Once the kishka is gone, you throw the rest out. I love cholent Friday night. Yeah. I learned it in yeshiva. In yeshiva, they have because I went to Lakewood. Kishka is amazing. But hold on one second. In yeshiva, let me tell you how it works. In yeshiva, there's 2 cholent pots. The cholent pot for the lunch the next day, and then the special cholent pot for the guys who stay up late learning. They have a treat, Friday night cholent. That's the best cholent in the whole world, the Friday night cholent. Try it at home. Cholent, I don't think it's 51% wet. I really don't. But TBD, we'll see. Okay, that's the end of halakha. I don't know halakha about cholent, but the halakha is if your food is 51% dry, you can reheat it. No more debating this. I don't care if there's a lot of juice. You can reheat it. If it's 51% dry, let's get to the next class.